In this video, we're going to look into how to light scenes by using the mental ray renderer and also indirect lights. Indirect lighting has to do with the way that lights work in the real world. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and create a point light into my scene. I'm just going to put it up here. Indirect lighting says that basically this light source is going to produce these pockets of energy called photons, and they basically going to travel through the space. So this particle, this pocket of energy travels through space, and it hits surfaces such as this red counter over here. And what this pocket of energy is going to do is sample that the color, and then as it travels and then bounce and travel to another surface and then take that color information to it. So it's indirect. So this counter will be indirectly illuminating other surfaces just by the fact that these photons are kind of bouncing on it and then bouncing onto other surfaces. So the neat thing about mental rays that allows you to simulate that types of lights. So and again, I'm just going to do a quick render of what I have going on right now just by adding that point light. And again, it just looks like everything's oversaturated. There's really nothing going on there. And I want to make a couple of change a couple of things in my settings before I start kind of illuminating my scene. So again, one of them will be making sure that my renderer it's mental ray, and again when you do that you get a bunch of different options. Under common, you want to make sure that it's enabled, okay? Because by default it has this. By default, it's usually the sRGB, which means that it the sRGB, it's how monitors kind of gamma correct images to be kind of displayed correctly. So by default it does this sRGB and then linear meaning that it's not auto corrected or not monitor corrected. So we want to make sure that both of these are sRGB. Otherwise our images might end up being a little bit too dark and they're not being gamma corrected correctly. The next thing I want to make sure I address is that I'm rendering at a smaller size than what my final render is going to be. But I want to make sure that it keeps the same aspect ratio. And again, that's because again we have a camera and I don't want to be concerned with things that are not being captured by my camera. So basically what's in this frame. And that's why I want to keep the same aspect ratio even though it's small. Under quality, I want to make sure that I have the production quality, otherwise our renders are going to look a little jagged. And again, we just want to make sure that that's not part of the fixes that we're trying to address as we're rendering. Alright, so the first thing you got to do is pretty much determine what's going to be the source of your lights in your scene, or at least the main source. You could have lights coming from outside and that being your main source. You can have lights coming from outside of your I guess main viewport that are not being seen, like for instance from behind over here. Or in this case, I'm gonna have my light source pretty much be this object right here, which is kind of projecting lights from the ceiling. Now the type of light that you choose is very important. I could in this instance I could use this point light, and again the nice thing about the point light is that it kind of emits lights in all directions. Alright, and perhaps I want this light to behave in that manner. Another one that I could use in this instance is an area light, but I might abstain from it because the way that these area lights work is that this arrow pretty much tell me what the light, where the light's being projected, but pretty much anything above it doesn't have any lights. So anything above this light is not really being illuminated, and that might cause some interesting dark areas for my lights in the ceiling. So I think I'm going to stick to this point light for now and see if it works. So I'm just going to go ahead and select it. Alright, so in order to start simulating this indirect lighting, the first thing that we gotta do is to we gotta tell Maya that we want to do that. So on the render settings, we gotta go to the indirect lighting tab and go to one of these effects that will allow us to simulate the indirect lighting and being global illumination. So I'm just going to go ahead and check on that. And again, this is the preview of my first render. It looks a little bright. Probably bring down my my lights a little bit. Maybe not that much. 0.75. And just want to do a quick render. And again, the indirect illumination is not doing anything at this point. The reason for that is because even though we told Maya that we wanted Maya to start calculating this indirect illumination, we haven't told our main source of light that we wanted to produce those energy pockets that are going to be bouncing around our room and sampling those colors. So we want to make sure that we go into emit photons. And again, by doing that, we're telling our light that we want to project those pockets of energy, and we want them to, as they hit a certain surface, we want them to sample some of that color and then indirectly light with that color other surfaces. So again, global illumination tells Maya that you want to start calculating that type of indirect illumination, but it doesn't do anything until you tell your light that you want to start producing those pockets of energy that samples the color. So I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this and go ahead and render this one more time. Alright, and it's very subtle, but we're starting to see how the red color is starting to kind of hit these the wall. And again, it's not a reflection, it's basically the light bouncing onto the red surfaces and starting projecting that color onto other surfaces. And again, we're starting to see a little bit on the couch as well. So sometimes, and again, the results for you are going to vary a little bit. Sometimes the first try, the first thing that you do might end up looking a little blotchy, a little kind of spotty. So I'm going to go into my global illumination, just kind of give you an idea of what's going on here, or what's happening. And again, I've just kind of increased the radius of the photon tracing, so basically it's showing me where all those photons is. And again, maybe starting out you might get something like this. Again, I usually want to keep this radius to 0, but I just want to demonstrate what might have been maybe some of the product as you kind of enabling the photons and stuff. So sometimes you get kind of spotty stuff like that, sometimes you get lucky and it's working kind of the way you want to from the beginning. And again, this is looking really nice, but sometimes you want to we want to increase the number of the amount of intensity of our photons, and we might also increase the number of photons that are being projected. And again, that should give us a little bit of better results. So I'm just going to go ahead and double this up to 16,000, and let's just double up the number of photons and see what kind of results we get. And I'm gonna just get rid of this, make a copy of this one, and then do another render. And our scene is going to be looking a little bit brighter, and again, that's because the photon intensity is basically this is the amount of power that you're giving each one of those photons as it leaves the source, and then the exponent, it's basically how long it takes for that to kind of lose that power. And you usually want to keep this 2, because that power of 2 is basically how real world lights kind of function. And again, adding a little bit more photons and a little bit of more power, it kind of gives us more of that indirect that color bouncing, so we can see more red here, and our scene's a little brighter. So I can say that at this point this is working the way I like to. Now, to make this into even more realistic result, I want to make sure that I start working with shadows. So under shadows, we don't want to use step map shadows, because that's going to give us a fake shadow. These are usually image kind of projected shadows, and they're not they don't look that realistic. Ray trace shadows are calculated to be realistic looking, realistic shadows, whereas the way that the real world projects them. So I'm just gonna go ahead and click on use ray trace shadows. And another thing that I want to do, it's change the decay rate of my light. Now, when you have a no decay, it means that your light is basically going to have the same intensity as it leaves, and that's usually not the case in the real world. Usually lights kind of they have a certain amount of power as they start, but then as they travel along, they lose that power. So we want to make sure we simulate that as well, because again, no light has a constant power throughout. It usually decays. So along with my shadows, and again, I can just do a copy of this and just see what my shadows are looking like. At first they're gonna look a little sharp, a little strong, but it's looking really nice. But I also want to start simulating the decay of my light, so I'm just going to go ahead and change it to linear. Now, again, depending on the kind of decay that you want for your scene, the more realistic that you can get is usually cubic. But one thing that you're going to notice, and again, I'm just going to be using linear for mine, is that when you change this the decay rate, basically the original intensity of your light is not going to be enough for your scene, because now your lights are starting to decay as they travel along. So notice that at this point, by adding a linear decay, again, my intensity was at 7.5, and not only my room, it's a lot lighter, but I'm starting to see a lot of spottiness and like weird shadows. And again, that's because one, the intensity of my light is not enough, and two, I might not have enough intensity in my photons. I might not have enough global illumination photons, and I also might not have enough shadow rays in order for this to work properly. So at this point, I need to start playing around with my settings just to make this look right. First thing I'm going to do, it's basically play with the intensity of my light. until I get something that works a little better for this. And again, that's nowhere near as intense as it was before. But again, the nice thing is that it's starting to look a little more realistic. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of some of these copies. Maybe that one. So I want to make a copy of this one. Maybe bring this up to 5 and see what it does. And again, usually kind of just increasing the intensity of your lights can only do so much. You are going to have to go back into your photon intensity and maybe start adding to that. So right now I have 16,000. I'm actually going to go ahead and double that to around 30,000. Maybe bring this to 25,000. And again, I want to see what this is going to do to my scene. So it's definitely a lot brighter. Unfortunately, I still have kind of this weird kind of spotty areas. Maybe it's a little bit too bright. But again, one of the things that we're seeing is that this kind of spotty areas, and I'm seeing a lot of graininess. So I could also maybe just kind of bring this down a bit. Maybe let's do 25,000 on this. I want to make sure that I have enough shadow rays, so perhaps I should kind of bring this up a little bit, maybe by 5. Alright, and but again, even adding to this just kind of can only do so much. Also, if I wanted to maybe soften my shadows a little bit, because right now they look a little sharp, I'm gonna go into my light radius and start adding to it. And let's just go to 1. That might be a little bit kind of extreme at this point, but let's just see what it does. And I'm starting to see a softer shadow. and again, I could try and kind of compare from before, and I can just make another copy, maybe increase this by a little bit more too. And definitely the edges of my of my shadows are definitely a lot softer, but I'm still getting a lot of spottiness. And you know, increasing the photon intensity might help, but then again, it might also make my scene a lot brighter than what I want it to be. So we're using global illumination to kind of recreate this indirect lighting effect on our scene. But what usually works best is not just using one method of indirect lighting, but kind of 2 at the same time. So usually I like to start with global illumination to just kind of give me this nice kind of bouncing of the lights, and again, it just comes to a point where this is not, global illumination alone is not going to be able to get rid of the graininess and some of the spot. So then you're going to introduce another kind of global illumination effect called final gathering. And what this is going to be able to do is kind of clean up your scene a little bit. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and sample this, and I'm going to turn on the final gathering and see what it does to kind of help clean up my graininess a little bit. Just going to go ahead and render that. Again, it's taking just a little bit longer. Alright, and I have a feeling this is going to look really nice. And again, we're starting to see the indirect illumination from this object onto the walls is looking quite nice. Nice soft shadows. I'm still getting a little bit of graininess in the back here and stuff like that. But to fix those, again, we can always go back, but you can tell that a lot of the spottiness that we're having with the original render, as you can see right here, and over here and stuff like that, that stuff is gone, and now we have like a nice soft render with really nice global illumination. So the final gathering went in there and just kind of cleaned up everything really nicely for us. And again, we still got a little bit of kind of graininess here, but for that we can go into the accuracy for both our final gathering and our global illumination, and maybe kind of smooth things up a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and double it. And again, keep in mind that doing these changes is going to increase your rendering time a lot. So everything's going to end up looking nice, but at the same time it's going to look it's expensive. It takes away for your time. So again, one of the things that you want to start doing then is making sure that if you're addressing things just like the graininess behind this vase over here, is that you're only looking at that and nothing else at the moment. So I'm going to start using what's called an area render to make sure that I'm only addressing that, and I'm doing that just by clicking on the image and just dragging this marquee, and it's just basically kind of creating this red highlight around the area that I want to view. So then I go into and click my render region mental ray, and all I'm looking at, it's basically all it's going to render is basically that area and nothing else. So it's a lot faster. I'm only focusing on the problem area and not the other areas. And again, I can always go and go back and look into my settings and see if there's anything else that I can add here to make sure that this is a lot nicer. Can also increase the number of shadow rays, and again, that could potentially increase my render time. But I'm just going to go ahead and do that. It's a lot better because I'm just focusing on the one area and not the overall piece. And you can assume that if the problems on this area as far as graininess go are solved, pretty much all the other areas have been. And again, by adding a lot of doubling the shadow rays that I had, it actually kind of softened my image right there, and that's looking really nice. And again, it's looking a little maybe darker than I like to. Maybe I can increase my intensity here a little bit. Do 7.5. See if that does anything. Alright, and this frame took about 1 minute and 22 seconds to render. And again, in comparison to some of our earlier renders that were just taking a couple seconds, every change that we made have actually increased our rendering time. But this is definitely a really nice render. Again, we have really soft shadows. Again, our light source coming from the top. Our graininess issue has we can see a little bit of it, but it's not something that's really concerning at this point. So now that I have a nice indirect lighting working throughout my scene, I can start texturing and kind of test reflections and test different types of textures and see how the indirect lighting is affecting them and stuff like that. But you probably want to start by setting up a basic kind of light rig in order for that to kind of to start testing materials. And again, you don't want to be having a lot of reflections and a lot of materials at this point, because then it'll take your rendering time a lot longer. So by just setting up our main source light and basically figure out how we want our shadows to look, we're just taking it's a lot faster by doing it this way than by applying textures and then applying lights and kind of testing everything at the same time. But then again, there is no right or wrong way of going about this. You know, I'd like just to make sure that I have at least a nice working indirect lighting setup before I start adding textures to my scene. But applying textures before and doing region renders as you're working through it is also something that could work as well. Alright, so this is the video on mental ray lighting using indirect light, and again we used both global illumination and final gathering to get this result. And on the next video we're going to address lights coming from outside or having a different source that's not inside the room. Alright, thank you for watching.